Hi, my name is Lizzie Chan, and I'm a member of the CPR Institute's Young Leaders in Alternative Dispute Resolution Steering Committee. I'm delighted to host today's episode of the CPR Y-ADR Corporate Counsel interview series, and I'm also delighted to let everybody know that we were recently shortlisted for the Global Arbitration Review Best Development Award, and we have our fingers crossed. For those who don't know, the CPR Y-ADR seeks to educate the next generation of leaders in the ADR field on the full spectrum of dispute prevention and resolution techniques, and to provide an insider's view into how CPR's community of in-house counsel, corporate counsel, and other experts in the field are using dispute prevention and resolution mechanisms to manage conflict to enable purpose. And as part of this goal, I've been talking to corporate counsel and ombuds and companies and institutions all around the world about their perspectives on dispute resolution and ADR, and also to share their career advice for young professionals. I am delighted today to welcome Dagfinn Nygaard, who is the Deputy General Counsel, Global Exploration and Production and HSE at ConocoPhillips based in Houston. Hi, Dagfinn, we're delighted to have you here today.
Thank you, Lizzie. I'm delighted to be here and look forward to the interview. I hope you're doing fine.
My first question for you is, could you please tell us a little bit about your background and your career?
Yes, I can do that. I've been working for many, many years, more than most perhaps. I am Norwegian and I started working in the Norwegian government in the Ministry of Petroleum and in the early 1980s. When I was at the licensing office or the negotiation office, which was the formal title of the function, and as a case officer. So I worked there for about 5 years and participated in the allocation of a number of license rounds, and some of them turned out to be big projects. And then I started in Conoco, and was with Conoco with a couple of interruptions for different other assignments I've had since then, since the late 80s. And first worked in Norway in government affairs with a development project on one of these licenses that we had previously awarded. And then I moved into into legal and then into a business development role, and then back into legal and internationally in 2001. And I've worked internationally ever since. I worked in Moscow, in London, and in Singapore, and now in Houston. I started in London supporting the former Soviet Union and some other business ventures we had elsewhere in Europe. And then I moved to Moscow. Most of the time I spent in Moscow, when I was in Moscow, I was spent in Kazakhstan, where we had a big project called Kashagan, which we negotiated more or less continuously for the 8 years I was involved with that project. And then I was in Singapore as a regional counsel for almost 9 years and covered Australia, Indonesia, and Vietnam, and Malaysia and China and several other areas. And then I moved to this job, which I now presently have in Houston, where I'm the head of all of the EMP lawyers in ConocoPhillips, both in the US and elsewhere.
Wow, Dagfinn, you've had the kind of career that I think so many of us would envy, working in so many different places around the world. And I'd love to ask you a few more questions about that later. But first of all, I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on disputes as legal counsel, when, why, and how to trigger them, and how to resolve them. And just to provide a bit of background, at the CPR, one of our motto is to manage conflict to enable purpose. And one of the ways we seek to do that is to work on the dispute prevention, the dispute prevention part. And we actually have a dispute prevention pledge where companies and law firms that sign up to it pledge to focus on avoiding disputes, so we don't actually get to the fully fledged litigation or arbitration or other forms of dispute resolution. So I'd love to hear your general thoughts on dispute prevention and resolution.
Yeah, and my general thought is perhaps going to surprise you a little. Dispute mechanisms in contracts are not very often activated, but one should not be afraid of them. They are there for a reason. And you may say that the litigious style and approach is worthwhile preventing, but in my experience is that when on the few occasions you do actually activate the dispute mechanisms in a contract, that is oftentimes the most efficient way to bring a discussion and a commercial dispute to an end. Partly because both sides then realize that if they keep this going, they will place the decision in the hands of another person or persons in an arbitration tribunal, and that creates a dynamic that will help people reach a conclusion. So dispute prevention is perhaps better called judicious use of disputes and judicious pursuit of them. Most disputes that I have been involved with have also been settled. Mm. And I have been in lengthy negotiations where the hesitancy among management to actually use the dispute provisions perhaps caused us to have more difficulties than we otherwise would have had if we had accelerated them. But one needs to be careful with it because it's a very significant step, and at least if it is done under heated circumstances, sometimes it's more routine in order to move it up to a different level in the organization if there is a procedure for negotiations prior to. So in those sense, there is in the terms and in the process itself an inherent and set up mediation process, which can be triggered when you feel that it's time to kind of take a step up and let's be done with this. But avoidance may not necessarily be the best thing, but initiating a dispute is something very different from carrying it through. So the trick is to use that space it gives you to, together with the commercial people, together with the relevant business people, to develop a strategy for how to solve it, without ever getting to the arbitration tribunal, to the decision. As I said, most of the disputes are solved on the path. I'm not sure whether that's what the answer you had expected, but that is my kind of take on it. It's prevention may not necessarily be the best thing, but judicious use of it is probably a better way of putting it.
And I love the unexpectedness of your answer. I think this is actually the first time in the series that I've talked to interviewees about the strategic role of activating disputes. Like with a lot of the other interviewees who've talked about like appropriate settlement, that it's really interesting to think about activating disputes as a way to bring parties to the negotiation table. Yeah. Now you mentioned before about talking with the commercial folks and the legal folks. So what's your advice for young people who want to, or young professionals who want to develop that commercial acumen? I think one of the difficulties is we come out of law school and you know the relevant law and you can apply it to the facts, but it's more difficult to sort of build that kind of commercial insight that clients appreciate. What's your advice on how we can build that?
I can give, but first two perspectives there. One thing is when you are in-house, and this goes perhaps back to my time in the ministry as well, when you are inside the system, you need to understand, and you will get the opportunity to understand what the business wants. As you work on the matter, you get deeper into it, you see that the legal is one of several bits and pieces to be put together in order to carry out, in our case, or in my case, it's always an oil and gas project of some kind. But you need a contract, but you need the reservoir, you need the facilities, you need the pipeline, you need all of that stuff that goes to it. And understanding what is driving these decisions, why do we do it, be curious about it, and find a solution for the business. You know, this starts already when you begin with the negotiations. Should you insist on a certain indemnity provision because that certain indemnity provision gives you strength? Or should you tell the guy, so what is really at risk here? How much of a risk do we run? Should we concede on that and rather do something else and see if we can trade it off? So try to become as organic with what is actually the business need in drafting the contract and putting the thing together. And then you, as often is the case, you know, you don't really have much influence on how the project looks like, because you come into it at a later stage. The contract was negotiated 10 years ago. It sits there as it sits. And each time a question comes up, there's typically not an answer, because that's why they are asking, because the answer isn't obvious and the contract is vague. And then again, try to understand how much is at stake, what sort of uncertainty. And I often say to commercial guys, they are also, the other side is also uncertain about how this contract is to be understood. There's uncertainty on both sides. Trade on the uncertainty. Find out where their uncertainty, how uncertain are they relative to us? Is there a space here? Can we reach a conclusion? And if you don't think you get that much further, and then once in a while, okay, let's step it up a little bit. But normally you never get to the dispute provisions where you find a solution, people land it. So you need to be constructive in the negotiation and in the exchange of views prior to. What I'm bottom line and what I'm saying is that for an internal counsel has the benefit of being so close to the business and being such an integral part of the business that they will understand what motivates and what the decisions are. When it comes to a young lawyer from the outside, pay attention to what the project is. What are the facts of this case? And not only the physical facts, but also try to understand what is the key point for the client? What do they really want to achieve? Do they want to fight it? Do they want to get a solution? Or is this more important than the other? Is it a matter of prestige? Is it a matter of principle? It's very difficult. Is it a matter of money? How much money is it? How realistic is it? So try to go a little bit beyond the giving the legal advice, because that's of course important, that's why you've been hired in, but also in doing so, try to understand as much as possible about the project itself. Pick it up when you have a conversation over a cup of coffee, ask how does this work, what's motivates it, why did you do it? You learn very slowly, but each time you picked up something and you find out you are in a new situation where the similar gadget or whatever it is there, ask, is this an issue? And then we'll say, not really in this context, but it's a good question, but it's a little bit over there. So you will gradually expand your knowledge, and at some point you start feeling, well, it takes a decade or three, but at some point you will start feeling, I've been here before, this is the issue over here, and this is that. And one of the benefits, I think, of being an external is that you will see so many different projects, but bottom is there is a business behind it, so that will be the same all the time. So you will find a different form of commonality than what I do find when I'm inside.
Your emphasis on the need to be curious and to really understand.
That is the whole bottom point. Be curious and try to go beyond the legal work. Do the legal work by all means, but be curious behind it and seek the context.
It strikes me that doing a client secondment could be a really good way to get to understand the client and to really have the time as well, and the opportunity to learn more about the relevant projects and maybe the commercial technical side. You mentioned at the beginning of the interview that you've worked in so many different places, Houston, Moscow, Singapore. I wondered if you could speak a little more about your experiences working in these different jurisdictions, and maybe any skills that you picked up, or whether there were any relevant cultural differences, maybe in terms of the assessment of legal risk or anything else.
Yeah, I work in the difference between I work now, I'm being exposed to Texas these days. I worked in the Soviet Union, worked in Kazakhstan, I've been to Bangladesh, been to China, Vietnam, and so on and so on. What strikes me is how little the cultural differences are. In the sense that there is a certain style in Westerners tend to approach things in a very sort of we have this win-win idea. We want to split the pie and we want to see each other's interests. We're very sort of dialogue and transactional and actually quite, one might say, sometimes too transactional. When you meet a Russian attitude in negotiations, I used to say win-win in Russian is as follows: I win, you lose, therefore I win. That's two wins, that's win-win. And so they are very stubborn and they don't really see much value in compromise.
Yeah.
Chinese have one issue. I'm not sure I am on thin ice with you here now, but my feeling is that in China, if there is one issue one can't really resolve, find another issue where you have another better situation and you can resolve that issue and you get rid of the other one. And you need to wait, you need to keep the discussion going while you're waiting for that other opportunity tomorrow.
Well, that's very thoughtful. Thank you, Dagfinn. And I think it's so interesting, you know, like ideas in one culture don't necessarily translate well to another culture. And then like the assessment of legal risk and how you might resolve them in different countries is really interesting as well.
But there's one thing I need to add, and that is you must always meet people with respect and be straight.
Absolutely.
And be polite. They know that you come from another culture, so there is not that much to do with understanding and behaving according to the cultural context, but in which, for instance, in the Soviet parts of the former Soviet Union areas, you should never shake hands through a door, open door. That is not well. So you will quickly be told that we don't do that over here. Okay, fair enough, I understand that. So sit straight and do all of these physical things, but be respectful and be honest in your dealings with them. That's important. Because that is commonplace in all cultures.
Yeah. And I completely agree with that message of respect. And I actually think, you know, one thing that really attracts so many young people to the field of international arbitration is just that cross-cultural factor. You know, I love the fact that, you know, I, as a Kiwi Chinese woman, I've been able to work in Hong Kong, New York, New Zealand, and London, and meet with people of so many different diversities. And that's a wonderful part of the field that we practice in.
Yes, exactly.
I also wanted to pick up on your discussion about your career and experience. And you said you did some business development roles and some legal roles. I was wondering if you could talk a little more about that and also how they might be complementary, for example.
Yeah, I was in business development a few years in Norway and before that in government affairs, actually. I think that lawyers can certainly do a good job in business development if they have a business instinct. Personally, I'm much better in helping business people than being the business person. I like to have an effective commercial guy who understands, or lady who understands and is very driven by it. They need to be, I'm a little bit too reluctant to get that deep into it, so I'm much better in if that's what we want to do. Let's try to find this way. So it's more supporting than anything, but transitioning between different roles certainly gives you a broader perspective, and that goes back to what I said about they need to understand the business and they need to understand the context of what are we actually after. So when you do different things, you get deeper into that, and then you see it from these other perspectives. And I think that is always helpful. A lawyer can also do a lot of good. It's very good today. My experience with the external affairs has been very useful in the sense that that is a situation where it's trying to learn what's going on and try to communicate what you want them to be aware of in their process, and maybe even make them think that the proposal that we are having is something they should adopt and promote. And you want to learn something and you want to achieve something, but you cannot sort of push too hard, because the government is government, and if they don't really, this is a busybody, I don't get rid of these guys. You have it teaches you the necessity of approaching negotiations with a little bit of and going back to my point of respect, and be delicate, and teach you diplomacy. That's important. That's always important.
Many of our listeners who are tuning in are practitioners who might be considering a career change. So I was wondering if you could speak about your advice for young practitioners who are looking to go in-house. And I've got a couple of questions around this, which is, what about the in-house counsel role do you think young practitioners should understand? At what stage of their careers should they consider going in-house? And then more practically, how do you find out about opportunities in-house?
Well, the latter one, I would have to say that how do you find out about them? You might be told by somebody who works in-house. Besides from that, it's this type of job offering market you are in, and that may differ from place to place. The main difference, not that I have had a couple brief stints in external in between. It's a little bit complicated, this, so let's not go into the deal, but I have had a brief, for instance, before I went into Conoco and from the ministry, I had a short stint as an associate in the law firm, which didn't suit me. And what didn't suit me with that was you only got a fragment. Fix this. This is my concern, do this for me. Or I am in trouble, can you help me get out of it? It became too fragmented, and I was sort of, so what's this an issue? Why do they want to? So if you, I can see that certain people love being external because it keeps varying all the time. It's a new client, it's a new problem, it's a new story, it's a new gallery of personalities, and each time you see these people change, it's fascinating. So if you like that, you could say panoply of people, with some with big and some with smaller issues, some with long-term, some with short-term relationships, but having that variation, going in-house might not be so attractive, at least not going in-house in a smaller company where there is not that much. If you like to be part of something bigger and sort of feel that you contribute to a whole range of things without necessarily doing all the legal work all the time, because an in-house lawyer does a lot of law, but an in-house lawyer does also a whole lot of communication and discussions with the other business people. You are not, the term client is a little, it's not my favorite term, but it's used, but it's actually your business partner. So the legal guy, the finance guy, the engineer, the geologist, whoever, and the commercial people, they all work in teams. And some more on this and some less on other things, depending on the issue at hand. But that sort of relationship, and that is a different type of work. And that's what made me attracted to in-house work, because I like to see this broader package of it, and you can accumulate experience. I've been lucky enough to work in several different companies with the same employer, because it's different to work in London than in Moscow than in Houston. So I have had this panoply of different people as well. But But going in-house, then you have only one client in the sense that you work for the company you are in-house with, but then on the other hand, that is a fairly large family of elements. So the two, it's an in-depth versus a broad circle of people. That's the two. And that's a personal inclination, I think, and also certainly a little bit about your personal experiences as you have your formative experiences. If you start out in a law firm, you might like that. I started out in a governmental ministry where the context was absolutely decisive and much more complicated than it is in a company. A company is there for its shareholders and for bottom line. Like a ministry is there to protect so many other interests. So that's an even more complicated and more complex story than the company.
Something you focused on was talking about the communication role of the in-house counsel, talking to the commercial people, the technical people. So, what are you expecting from, or what do you like to get from external counsel in terms of their advice that then best sets you up to communicate with all these other parts of your company? I mean, I think, of course, advice should be succinct and there should be a clear recommendation, but I was wondering if you had any best practice tips on a good work product for in-house counsel.
Well, that's a very interesting question. What's a good I think a good, there isn't, you can give precise legal advice, but the trouble with law, as it is not a precise science, is that you never really know, well, okay, this is possibly the outcome. Be honest about the uncertainties. Be honest about, this is what it looks like, but it could also look a little bit like this, and there is a balance here, and I think you have a fair chance on what you try to push for, but that's the weakness in it, and we need to get that under control. And if you can't get that under control, if you can't put that argument together, if you don't have any facts supporting that specific understanding of the contract on this point, then we may have a problem. So in a way, give advice, not on the one hand and the other hand, but this is what I advise you, and these are the uncertainties that are associated with it that we need to be aware of and that we need to manage. That, I think, is a good legal advice because it really sticks. And also tell me that this is, forget about it. You are not going to get anywhere. You should stay away from this. And there is also, with some external counsels, a reluctance to take in. I've had situations, I know I go back to this context and what's the business and all of that is, trying to understand what motivated certain provisions and certain arrangements. That's at least very important in a business of this magnitude. Why have you arranged the placing of that risk there rather than there? What motivates that? Why are you assuming that risk? Why is that party assuming that risk? Because it is, say, in a transportation system, who is taking the risk for the product flowing through the pipe? What motivates that? Is that insurance? Is it a commercial arrangement? So in a way, try to understand what is the underlying business reality that created a given solution in a contract. That is, then it is getting pretty sophisticated, because then you can say, I don't think it, then you can communicate much better internally with the other people on the commercial side of the stuff. You can give external advice that fathoms the underlying commercial reality. As an example, pipeline tariff may actually be dictated by a complexity of several elements: the upstream facility, the pipeline, and the onshore facility, and how you allocate profits between them. For instance, this is taking it from Norwegian practice, there was a deliberate policy in Norway to push the risk and also the upside to the field facilities, which produces the field. That's where the risk and that's where the investment is. And then neutralize as much as possible downstream. So when you find a pipeline in Norway, you will say, what's the point of this? It doesn't make much money. It has, but yes, but it's also a piece of steel. And that piece of steel controls the access to the market. And if you give these guys free access, they can strangle the field in the other end. But that's not in the interest of the society. They want the maximum production, and therefore the transportation is tightened down to almost nothing. You don't really have anything, you just get a fixed fee, and there is not much. It's a very kind of oil industry example, but understanding that type of thing will certainly help when need be.
It's a very good example. Yeah. And one thing I wanted to pick up on is your focus on uncertainties and helping the client navigate that. I think is so important. As you point out, there are uncertainties for our own client, but the other side is also probably uncertain about their own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you need to try it a little bit, and also good and external advice would say this argument is from the other side is weak on this point, and then that's when going back to, do you want to avoid disputes or how do you use them? Use them judiciously, because then people need to come up with, this is the best I have, and then you can get to the situation. That doesn't hold.
Exactly.
And they can say, yes, and I know that you don't, that doesn't hold. Yes, exactly. So let's trade on these uncertainties. And that's the point, yes.
You've shared so many wonderful ideas with us, Dagfinn. I wanted to wrap up this interview with one question that we've asked almost all of our interviewees, which is, what is your advice for young practitioners in the ADR field?
To enter.
So what is your advice for young professionals? It could be life advice, work advice.
Oh, going forward, generally speaking.
Yes.
Keep your curiosity. Be respectful with everyone you meet. That, I think, and work hard.
And those are such wonderful messages, and I will definitely continue to be curious both in my legal career and outside. And I just wanted to thank you again, Dagfinn, for your time and for all the wonderful insights that you shared today, and to thank our audience for tuning in.
Thank you very much. Good seeing you.